mosaic of Flat Rock's past lay a wilderness, an age-old land of the Cherokees, where ceremonial fires on the great flat rock gave a white man's settlement its name. In the early 1800s, planters and statesmen of the South Carolina Low Country, especially of Charleston, came into the pioneer settlement that had come to be called Flat Rock. Mountain air offered relief from the oppressive heat and humidity of coastal summers. Land was cheap, and the pioneers were good builders. Construction of spacious houses began in the 1820s. The summer colony grew and became known as Little Charleston of the Mountains. After the Civil War, these historic houses were remodeled by a succession of owners, belying the simple lines chosen by the men who built them a century and a half ago. Yet the influence of colonial Charleston remains. This sesquicentennial audiovisual tour of the historic sites of Flat Rock has been prepared for your information and enjoyment. It will also serve as a record for future generations.
Mitchell King arrived in Charleston, South Carolina in 1805, a penniless immigrant 22 years of age. Relying solely on his education and personal attributes, he quickly took his place in the literary and social circles of Charleston. He taught at the College of Charleston and was later a trustee of that institution, as well as of the Medical College of South Carolina. He studied law and became a probate judge. In 1829, Mitchell King was chairman of a committee journeying to Tennessee in the interest of a proposed railroad linking the coast of South Carolina with the West. He was accompanied by his wife, whose health caused him much concern. When they stopped for several days at the Flat Rock Inn, she became so greatly improved that he immediately bought land and arranged for a summer home to be built. He called it Argyle after his wife's ancestral shire in Scotland, she being descended from the ducal line of Campbell. Whether the house was built around a pioneer one remains a question. If it were, Argyle is the oldest house in the summer colony. Otherwise, it is the second oldest. It's built of native timbers and of bricks burned on the premises. Local carpenters, together with cabinet makers from Charleston, made much of the furniture, still in use by members of the King family. It was Alexander Campbell King, an attorney of Atlanta and a grandson of Mitchell King, and at one time Solicitor General under Woodrow Wilson, who removed the lattice work and added the stately columns. Argyle now belongs to his son and namesake, also an attorney of Atlanta. A reminder of pioneer times stands on the premises. Behind the main house, this single room that was Judge King's library, is a 3-bedroom cottage now, frequently occupied by Argyle's present owner. A servant's house stands directly behind the main house. Beyond the sight of visitors is a storage building, which is particularly interesting for its verge rafters. Argyle is a blend of natural beauty, of man-made charm, and of bonds that have brought family and friends together across almost 150 years.
Majestic Mountain Lodge, circa 1827, is the patriarch of the fine old houses of Flat Rock and a monument to its builders, Charles and Susan Baring. Susan was an obscure Welsh girl, but clever and beautiful. She became a well-known London beauty and married James Haywood, a South Carolina rice planter. His brother, Thomas, was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. When Haywood died 2 years later, Lord Ashburton sent his cousin, Charles Baring, of Baring Brothers banking firm of London, to bring Susan back to be his bride. Charles married her himself, and seeking a healthful summer climate for his wife, came to Flat Rock, bought 3,000 acres, and built up an estate in the English manner. There was a manor house, a deer park, gatekeeper's cottage, stables, a carriage house, barn, a 3-story building and 2 cottages in which to quarter slaves, a kitchen building, a chapel, now St. John in the Wilderness, and a rectory. The boxwoods and long avenue of pines and hemlocks, which they planted over 150 years ago, are still growing there.
The first Episcopal church in the vast mountain area of North Carolina began as the private chapel of Charles and Susan Baring. The original wooden structure burned, and in its place a brick building was erected with 5 pews on each side of the aisle and a slave gallery at the rear. Entrance to the nave was from the north side, just west of the present carriage entrance. In 1836, Bishop Ives consecrated the building under the name of St. John in the Wilderness and received for the diocese in North Carolina a deed to the building and grounds. Charles and Susan Baring are buried in a vault beneath the wall on which marble tablets hang in their memory. In 1852, the church was enlarged and made to resemble an English country chapel. Brass nameplates have been retained, and doors with patterned panels enclose the pews. History sleeps in the churchyard of St. John in the Wilderness. Grass-covered graves, set apart by fine iron fences, lie in the shade of tall trees. Headstones bear names recorded in our nation's past. Among the oldest graves is that of James Brown, who served with the Royal Scots Greys in the Battle of Waterloo. He came to Flat Rock with the Barings and was a charter member of the church. Charles Baring set aside part of the churchyard property as a burial ground for slaves. White crosses mark their graves, and on a granite stone is written, "Here lie the members of the Church of St. John in the Wilderness, who were slaves, freedmen, and their children." Many years ago, the vestry provided a section for the burial of servants whose families could not afford to pay for the use of a lot. Men who helped shape the course of history have knelt at the altar brought from England when the church was built in 1834. For many years, services were held only during the summer months, the congregation being made up almost entirely of members of the Flat Rock Summer Colony. Though claimed by a North Carolina diocese, St. John in the Wilderness belonged in truth to Flat Rock's little Charleston of the mountains.
The Parsonage, 1853. On July the 15th, 1853, Edward Trenham donated 11 acres of land to the vestry and wardens of St. John in the Wilderness for the purpose of building a parsonage close to the church. A handsome rock house was built in the style of the Federal period and was used until recently as a residence for the church's clergymen. In 1973, the old house was restored by Historic Flat Rock Incorporated. One room is reserved as their headquarters, and the rest is leased to Mrs. Robert Mason, who has furnished it with antiques which blend perfectly with the hard pine floors, the recessed windows, the old glass, and the original peach-colored woodwork. A spiral stair is built into the circular walls of the hallway and leads to the second floor.
When the Count de Choiseul came to Flat Rock in 1836, he purchased land from Charles Baring and built a simple wooden house. He called his place Saluda Cottages, for this house and others already standing were near the old Saluda path that had brought traders and pioneers into the mountain area. The de Choiseuls lived at Saluda Cottages until the completion of the castle 5 years later. Saluda Cottages has passed through a succession of ownerships, among them Christopher G. Meminger, Reverend C.C. Pinckney, and Izard Middleton, all of Charleston. At the close of the Civil War, Middleton was forced to sell the place for a small sum to northern speculators. It was they who began making major changes in the appearance of the house. When it came again into the hands of a Charlestonian, General Siegling, owner of the Charleston News and Courier, he added the tower with a cupola, a porte-cochere, and arched bay windows. A circular stairway fashioned of intricate ironwork and reaching from the basement to the third story bears the label of Champion Iron Company, Canton, Ohio, leading one to suspect it was installed during the ownership of a Collins family of Ohio. The house boasts 16 fireplaces displaying musical cherubs, dancing figures, and leaf and branch designs raised on cast iron firebacks. Tile around the entrance hall fireplace is identical with that of the City Hall in Charleston. Extensive grounds are artistically laid out with lawns and with tall hemlocks planted in rings of 5 and 7. The curving driveway, once the back entrance, leads to the porte cochere, formerly the back of the house, but now the front. The northern exposure, which was the front, commanded a view of a fountain and statues on a wide lawn extending to the forest beyond. The front drive wound among the trees to the main road. The Count de Choiseul was a cousin of Louis Philippe and a member of the old regime of royalists in France. For political reasons, he fled his native country, going first to England, then coming to America as consul at Charleston. He built the castle in 1841, a year-round dwelling with beautifully landscaped grounds, heated graperies, and an extensive farm. The Countess and her family lived here for 20 years while the Count remained in Charleston for periods as long as were necessary to attend to his official duties. After the Countess died, the Count sold the place to Colonel David Urquhart of New Orleans and returned to France in order that his youngest son might inherit his mother's estate. Charles, the oldest son, was killed in action during the Civil War, and his 2 sisters, left destitute in the aftermath of war, opened a school in a house donated to them by Flat Rock residents. When the Mrs. Norton of Louisville, Kentucky, came into possession of the castle in 1897, they made marked improvements, renovating and enlarging the house and adding measurably to the acreage around it. In landscaping, they sought the advice of Frederick Law Olmsted, designer of Central Park in New York and of the Biltmore Gardens in Asheville. Chanteloup is the name by which the castle is known today. High costs and the ravages of time make year-round occupation of Chanteloup impossible. Yet the present owner continues searching for a feasible way to make the place his home.
Connemara, 1839. Christopher Gustavus Memminger, a German orphan, was adopted by Governor Thomas Bennett of South Carolina. The boy grew up to be a great leader of the South. He was Secretary of the Treasury of the Confederacy and one of the authors of its Constitution. He started the public school system of South Carolina and was chief promoter and first president of the Spartanburg and Asheville Railway Company, which did much to open up the mountain area of North Carolina. He built Rock Hill. Later, the place was bought by Captain Ellison Smythe, founder and president of Balfour Mills, who changed the name to Connemara. Carl Sandburg, famed poet, historian, Pulitzer Prize winner, and biographer of Abraham Lincoln, bought Connemara in 1945 and lived there with Mrs. Sandburg, his 3 daughters, and 2 grandchildren until his death in 1967. His granddaughter, Paula Steichen, has written a book about it called My Connemara. It describes her idyllic childhood on this beautiful farm, surrounded by a loving family, her mother's goat herd, other farm animals, and everything to make a child happy. It is now open to the public, a National Historic Site with the Sandburg Museum.
Pleasant Hill was built by an early member of the Flat Rock Summer Colony, William Johnston of Georgetown, South Carolina, son of Andrew Johnston, who owned the adjoining place, Beaumont. He built the house in 1839, and 19 years later sold it to a relative, Dr. Means of Paris Island. Shortly after 1900, the house was remodeled along lines of a Swiss chalet.
This handsome stone house, Beaumont, was built by Andrew Johnston, a rice planter from Georgetown, South Carolina, on on an 800-acre tract. In 1850, he and Christopher Gustavus Memminger opened the Little River Road, leading to the heart of Flat Rock. In the last year of the Civil War, Johnston was tragically murdered by bushwhackers, whom he had just entertained for dinner in his home. In 1909, the estate was acquired by Frank Hayne, descendant of Governor Robert Hayne of South Carolina. Mr. Hayne had cornered the national cotton market with Mr. Hugh Vincent, who bought Tenerife, the adjoining estate. In 1890, Christopher Gustavus Memminger's son, Edward Reed Memminger, built Tranquility, high on a hill, overlooking the Little River Road. Forced by bad health to give up his law practice in Charleston, he retired here, reading, studying, and creating an extensive garden in which he put many unusual plants collected from all over the world. Upon his death, 1,000 of his rare specimens went to the University of North Carolina. Tranquility was inherited by his daughter, Marjorie Normand, for whom he wrote a book about his memories of old Flat Rock. Mrs. Normand spent her life commuting between China and Flat Rock.
In 1853, Charles Baring, in an effort to clear his debts, sold Mountain Lodge to George Trenholm, Secretary of the Confederate Treasury after Memminger. Baring moved with his second wife, the former Constance Dent, and their son across the high road to a smaller house called Solitude, and there he lived until his death in 1865. Solitude was sold to George Trenholm and by him to Mrs. Henrietta Aiken Rhett, who occupied it for many summers. About 1910, Solitude was moved to a location slightly southward, and the Highland Lake Inn was built on its site. When the Georgia Military Academy held summer sessions in Flat Rock, Solitude was expanded for use as offices and classrooms. It is now used by Our Lady of the Hills, a Catholic assembly.
Dunroy was settled in 1852 by David Williams, a rice planter of Camden, South Carolina, whose wife was Mary B. Chestnut, a sister of the author of Diary from Dixie, a story of life as the wife of an aide to Jefferson Davis during Civil War days. Their housewarming party here was a beautiful masked ball. After Mr. Williams, Mrs. James Rutledge and Mrs. Julius Hayward owned Dunroy. Then Major General Campbell King, grandson of Judge Mitchell King. The present owner is his son, Dr. D.I.C. King. Dunroy's 100 acres overlooks Bird Wing, Bear Wallow, and Sugarloaf Mountains.
As early as 1829, the mail route followed the old Saluda Path into the pioneer settlement of Flat Rock. This building was erected in 1847, serving the community until the mid-1960s when the present post office building was erected. Originally, the post office was more than a place to receive and dispatch mail. It was a gathering place for men of the community, especially during the turbulent days following the Civil War, for there the men of Flat Rock were organized to keep watch. When the post route was established between Greenville and Asheville, mail was delivered twice a week, then daily by 4-horse stage. As the driver approached Flat Rock, descending Butte Mountain on his way from Greenville, he winded his horn to warn of his coming. The first postmaster, Peter Stradley, had fought with the English forces at the Battle of Waterloo and had come as a pioneer settler to Flat Rock. Dr. Allen Memminger, son of Christopher G. Memminger, built this house on his return from the study of medicine in Germany. Since his parents had been natives of that country, and he had spent some years there, it is understandable that a German influence would be reflected in his dwelling. Enchantment, as Dr. Memminger called his house, stands atop a hill overlooking the Old Mill Lake. A long, curving drive bordered by age-old white pines once led from Depot Road. For many years, the place belonged to Dr. Meminger's daughter, Mary, who was married first to a Pinckney of Charleston, then to Robert E. Lee III, grandson of General Lee.
Kenmure, circa 1850. A mile-long drive through pleasant meadows, over rock bridges, by boxwood gardens, and a jewel lake leads to Kenmure Great House, often called the most beautiful home in the state. Judge Mitchell King's son, Dr. Mitchell King, designed and built the house. Dr. King studied in Germany, where he was a friend of Otto von Bismarck. Their correspondence is now in the Congressional Library in Washington. Dr. King married Elizabeth Middleton of Charleston's Middleton Gardens. There were originally 23 buildings on this 3,000-acre estate. The handsome old rock building behind the house was Dr. King's office and also contained quarters for the house servants. After Dr. King's death, the property was acquired from his daughter by Mr. Gordon McCabe, Sr. of Charleston, a direct descendant of George Taylor, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence.
Tall Trees, formerly Green Lawn, was a modest dwelling built on land originally a part of the Argyle Tract. It was the summer home of Arthur Middleton U.G. and his wife Margaret, a daughter of Judge Mitchell King. In 1852, the place was bought by Thomas Bennett, a governor of South Carolina and the foster father of Christopher G. Meminger. It came again into the U.G. family, the last owner to have come from the South Carolina Low Country. Under the later ownership of Sam Pickard, a vice president of the Columbia Broadcasting System, the house was remodeled, columns being added and other changes being made both outside and in. Subsequent owners have cut off the northern portion of the grounds, where a lake and several buildings have been added. A secret stairway lies sealed within the center of the house. Dr. Arthur R. Garrard, a doctor of Charleston, South Carolina, bought land in Flat Rock in 1885. He built a house somewhat on the plan of a Swiss chalet, and in deference to his German wife, he named his place Heidelberg, beautifying the grounds until Heidelberg became one of the showplaces of post-war Flat Rock. In 1893, Dr. Garrard added a tower and greatly enlarged the house and opened it as a hotel for summer visitors. For reasons long forgotten, the hotel was not a success. Dr. Garrard then converted the hotel into a tubercular sanatorium. But this venture, too, failed, and Dr. Garrard sold Heidelberg and moved to New York. In 1921, the property was sold to the Associate Reformed Presbyterian denomination for an assembly ground. Many small houses have been built on the property by members of that denomination who come from South Carolina and neighboring states for church-centered summer vacations. Dr. Garrard's office serves today as the Von Clarken office. The main building was covered with pebble dash around the turn of the century, and 50 years later, asbestos shingles were placed over the pebble dashing. These outer layers remain today, covering the original clapboard exterior. Forced by the need of extensive interior renovation, if the main building were to continue to be used, the Von Clarken Assembly has acted with restoration and preservation in mind.
When Charles Baring and Judge Mitchell King began talking about their newfound Mountain Eden, prosperous rice planters began coming in such numbers that stagecoach inns could no longer accommodate them. So, in 1853, Henry T. Farmer, nephew of Susan Baring, built Farmer's Hotel and became its genial host. Squire Farmer's Hotel was open winter and summer. He held hunting parties for deer, wild turkey, bear, and other game, which was roasted in its huge kitchen fireplace. Very little remodeling has been done in the inn, which was built with timbers cut by slaves. Its 22 fireplaces are still in use. A later owner was Mrs. Annie D. Martin, who changed its name to Woodfield. The present owner, Mrs. Joseph Clements, carries on its time-honored tradition of Southern hospitality. Hill Den was built shortly after the Civil War by Henry Tudor Farmer, owner of Farmer's Hotel, for General Edward Alexander, who had served on General Robert E. Lee's staff. General Alexander was a graduate of West Point and afterwards an instructor there. He was a brilliant engineer and artillerist and a genius at signal systems. After the war, he became president of Columbia Oil Company, of a number of railway companies, and the Ocean Steamship Company. In addition, he wrote a history of the war, which received great acclaim at the time and remains a classic to this day. Hill Den remained in the possession of his family until the 1930s.
The mill begun by Peter Summey in 1830 has played an important role in Flat Rock's past. A grist mill at first, it was rebuilt by Henry Farmer as a furniture factory, where the sturdy walnut Flat Rock chairs were made for many of the summer households. After the turn of the century, William C. Jordan became operator of the old mill, once again a grist mill, and for 50 years he supplied the people of Henderson County with all water-ground products. Mr. Jordan's business so increased that an undershot wheel was inadequate for his needs, so a dam was built and an overshot wheel installed. The wheel still stands, along with the part of the mill built at that same time. In the late 1940s, Gene Brown of Charlotte acquired the property and converted the mill into a complex of guest rooms and apartments. Frederick Rutledge of Charleston was among the first settlers of the Flat Rock summer colony. In 1828, he built a small frame house on land later known as Brooklands. Shortly afterward, he sold his place to Charles and Mary Edmondson. In 1841, Brooklands was bought by Edward Molyneux, British consul to Savannah, who laid it out according to his English ideas. The architecture of the house, the gardens with thorn hedges, and a rustic summer house were all of English design, while the management of his farm was on English principles of agriculture. In 1882, Brooklands became the home of Major Theodore Barker, who had served with Wade Hampton's brigade and had afterwards married Louisa King, daughter of Judge Mitchell King. After Major Barker's death, the house and 244 acres of land were sold, much of the latter for development. The house was occupied only in summer until recent owners made renovations showing Williamsburg influence and equipped it for year-round living. The back of the house has now become the front. Outbuildings remain, among them the old kitchen set apart from the main house as the custom was. Inside the house, a fireplace grate is a cast iron fireback bearing a raised coat of arms below a crown, as is seen in the royal castles of England of the Elizabethan period.
In 1855, Dr. J.G. Schoolbread built a home in Flat Rock on an 860-acre estate. He named it Tenerife, after one of the Canary Islands. Charles Albert Hill, an English cotton broker of Charleston, bought it from him in 1883. He employed liveried English servants to care for his guests, who were entertained with morning tennis, horseback rides, swimming in Tenerife's beautiful lake, and gay parties on its wide verandas. Hugh de Lacy Vincent, a friend and business associate of Mr. Hill, was the next owner. He bought it in 1903, having cornered the national cotton market in cooperation with Frank Hayne, owner of Beaumont.
Charles Coatsworth Pinckney built the original house, Piedmont, in 1846. He was a son of the ambassador to the court of St. James under George Washington, and a nephew of the man who said, "Millions for defense and not 1 cent for tribute." Later, Henry Middleton, whose forefather founded Middleton Gardens in Charleston, inherited the place from his wife, the former Betty Miles, daughter of General William Miles, who had been president of the University of South Carolina in 1833, and an owner of the famous Humus plantation in Louisiana. General Miles' library was said to be the finest in the South. Piedmont is now owned by Mrs. Beverly Middleton's nephew, Daniel Ravenel of Charleston. Dr. Mitchell C. King, son of Judge Mitchell King of Argyle, built a modest cottage in which to live while timber seasoned for his permanent home, Glenroy. When Glenroy was done, the cottage was placed on logs and pulled by oxen approximately a quarter of a mile to its present site. In 1857, Dr. King sold the cottage to Elizabeth Pinckney Rutledge and her sister Sarah, who spent many summers there, and from whom stems the name Rutledge Cottage. Since 1967, Rutledge Cottage has been the year-round home of Mr. and Mrs. Alexander Schenck. They have built a new kitchen as an addition connecting the old kitchen with the main house. The old kitchen, with its servants' quarters and its large fireplace, once used for cooking, now serves as an additional living quarters.
The old Lowndes house was built in 1847 beside a large flat rock, for which Flat Rock was named. It was here that the Cherokee Indians met and held their councils long before the low country summer people came here. The house was built by Mr. Iron Lowndes, whose family still live nearby. It is now owned and occupied by members of the State Theater of North Carolina, who provide the countryside with excellent Broadway productions every week during the summer.
Pinecrest, built in the early 1800s, is significant for its architecture and its outbuildings, including servants' quarters and a spring house still standing. Its spacious grounds are characteristic of those enjoyed by low-country summer residents.
In 1847, Robert Pringle of Charleston built this home in the manner of the Gothic Revival. He was succeeded by Mr. Arthur Barnwell, and later by Mr. Augustine Smythe, also of Charleston. There are 5 avenues of white pines on the place. Also, a row of slave cabins, a tennis court, tenant farmhouses, a formal garden, and a bowling green. 2 stone pillars of hand-cut rock mark the entrance, and the driveway is walled by the same stones. The estate is now owned by Mr. Smythe's 2 granddaughters and their families, Mr. and Mrs. Sherwood Cleveland and Mr. and Miss John Lumpkin of Columbia, South Carolina.
In 1877, Colonel William Elliott, a United States Senator from Beaufort, South Carolina, built Vincennes near the site of an earlier house belonging to his grandfather. From its hilltop, Vincennes commands a view of Highland Lake. A 65-foot porch ornamented with scroll saw brackets on the posts spans the front of the house. Door-like windows open onto the porch, and a central hallway leading to the garden brings sight of a lovely vista into the house. Vincennes had been vacant for a number of years when it was bought and restored by Mr. and Mrs. William E. Hartman. While it continues to be Mr. Hartman's year-round home, he has made it his generous donation to historic Flat Rock.
With the passage of time, a number of once prominent structures in the Flat Rock area have disappeared. The next 11 slides will picture 4 such places that no longer exist but were important landmarks in their time. Ravenswood was built in 1859 and 60 by the Reverend John Grimke Drayton, who had laid out and planted the gardens of Magnolia on the Ashley, his low country estate near Charleston. Ravenswood was constructed on land once acquired from Henry Farmer and C.G. Meminger, but by the mid-1960s it had fallen into such disrepair that it was torn down. The name of this house, Diamond in the Desert, is credited to a Charleston woman who once visited this Gothic dwelling with its lacy scroll sawn and latticed external trim and was amazed to find it in the seeming wilderness of flat rock. It was built between 1832 and 1836 by Charles Baring to serve as the first rectory of the Episcopal Church here. Regrettably, this once beautiful structure was struck by lightning and burned to the ground in 1960. All that remains today are the basic foundation and 2 chimneys.
When Flat Rock's history was in the making, Jim Markley was there. In the early 1960s, advancing age and failing health forced him to close the oldest blacksmith shop in Henderson County. From his father, who had established the shop, Jim had learned to be a master of his craft. But he was much more than that. He was a wellspring of information about Flat Rock's past. His stories and his singular way of telling them made visits to the blacksmith shop long-remembered experiences. Vital to the little Charleston of the mountains was the railroad linking Flat Rock with the South Carolina low country. To avoid having trains run near private homes, Judge Mitchell King donated a distant section of his property, and there the tracks were laid. Around the railroad station, a village grew and officially became East Flat Rock. Yet the depot bore the name Flat Rock and continued to do so until 1958, when it was removed.
The Flat Rock Stone Ender House lies at the base of Glassy Mountain. Although built in the early 1970s, it is an accurate replica of the original Stone Ender House built by Thomas Clements in 1680 in Johnston, Rhode Island. The timbers in the present structure were collected over a 20-year period. They came from early Charleston buildings, which were unfortunately destroyed before the present zoning ordinances. This relatively new house is slightly longer than the original one, but the construction is the same. The original houses of this type contained such rooms as a buttery, or room on the colder side, and a bourning room, which was close to the chimney and was so named for obvious reasons. It is the charm of such turns and the romance of the period of the settling of western North Carolina which motivated a couple from Charleston to build this replica from a long past era. The house stands in tribute to those hardy people who came into the wilderness and were swallowed up by the vastness of this beautiful country.